Hi, this is Grandma Lorie with the Bible story of the Jews go back home from Babylon to Judea. To begin with, let's take a look at the life of Prophet Daniel, who had become beloved and valuable to 4 kings of Babylon. When he was a teenager, Daniel and his Jewish friends refused to eat the king's meat, wine, and super sweet desserts that had been used in idol worship. After a test, the Jews proved they were healthier than the other boys who did eat nothing but meat, wine, and sugar. Too much unhealthy food. King Nebuchadnezzar was impressed by the Jewish boys. Later, Daniel explained the dreams of King Nebuchadnezzar. One dream was about a statue with a gold head, silver shoulders, a brass stomach, and iron legs. He said the statue was a symbol about future kingdoms to come into the world. Another dream was about King Nebuchadnezzar going crazy and living like an animal for 7 years. A few years after that, Daniel was able to read strange writing on the wall of King Belshazzar's banquet hall. The word said Belshazzar's kingdom was done for, and he would quickly lose it. King Belshazzar did lose his kingdom and his life that very night. Also, that very night, a great army of Medes and Persians came under the wall of Babylon and took over the city. Still later, some of Daniel's enemies tricked King Darius into throwing Daniel into a den of lions. Both King Darius and Daniel prayed to the God of heaven for the prophet's protection, and the lions didn't even scratch him. But by today's story, Daniel had grown quite old, almost 80. His hair and beard were white. When Daniel wanted to rest, he liked to sit in his study reading scrolls of the words of God's prophets from past centuries. Several times he read the words of a very famous prophet named Isaiah, who had died more than 120 years before that. A couple of sentences from Isaiah's scrolls told a prophecy that always puzzled Daniel. Isaiah had written that some great man named Cyrus had been chosen by God even before the world was made. This man, Cyrus, would somehow be a shepherd to the children of Israel. A shepherd? Daniel wondered. And guess what? The great army that took over Babylon by marching under the city wall was led by a man named General Cyrus. At first, Daniel didn't think anything about General Cyrus being the one in Isaiah's scriptures from 100 years ago. But General Cyrus did become the king of the whole empire soon after, which in those days was most of the known world. All of the coral-colored part is his kingdom, all the way down to Egypt on one side, all the way up almost to Greece on the other, all the way almost to India on that side. It was the biggest kingdom, and like the other kings before him, King Cyrus came to truly admire and depend on Daniel in many ways. He knew Daniel was faithful to his God, and he had heard that the prophecies of Daniel always came true. As you know, there were many idols worshipped all over Babylon, maybe hundreds. In the king's main room, Cyrus had a great carved idol of his favorite god, named Bel. One evening, when the king and Daniel were working out a problem, King Cyrus invited Daniel to kneel with him before the idol in his room. Offerings of food and drink had been laid out in front of the idol by the priests. Daniel said, "I am sorry, Your Majesty, but I cannot worship your idol. It's only a carving made of brass. It isn't a live god at all. It cannot eat or drink, and it certainly cannot answer your prayers or tell you what to do." Cyrus was upset. "You are wrong, Daniel. This idol does eat and drink every day. Each night, the priests leave food and drink in front of the idol for Bel. In the morning, it's all gone." Daniel said, "O mighty king, forgive me, but brass cannot eat or drink. Metal and stone are not alive. It is your priests who lay out the food and your priests who eat it after everyone has gone. Please think about this, Your Majesty." The king whirled to face the priests who were cowering behind him. He thundered, "Is this true? Do you indeed eat the food and drink left here for Bel?" One of them replied, "Oh, great king," his voice quivered, "it is the spirit of the god Bel that eats the spirit of the food and wine we bring him. When Bel has had the fullness of the food's spirit, then we do eat what's left over, which is only the dead remains of the food. Bel allows us to eat the remains that are left after he has eaten the spirit of it and drank the spirit of the wine, Your Majesty." The king eyed the worried priest with suspicious anger. With a growl in his throat, he stalked from the room. Daniel humbly followed him. The priests looked after Daniel with hate and fury. They were now his enemies for life, but they would not dare attack Daniel. After pacing his room for 10 minutes, the king demanded, "And you, Daniel, how do you worship your invisible God?" Daniel humbly bowed to the king. "Oh, great king, my God is not a statue or an image. He is alive in a holy place we are not allowed to see. With his eternal power, he created the universe and all the things in it. He created your body, O king, and keeps it alive from minute to minute, day to day. I pray to him with my own words 3 times a day. Plus also, I pray whenever I need his advice and direction." Daniel made sure the king was listening before he went on. "O king, my God answers me, sometimes in words given clearly into my mind. Sometimes he speaks with words out loud for my ears to hear. Sometimes he speaks in dreams or visions, the same kinds of dreams and visions with which he answered King Nebuchadnezzar, Belshazzar, and Darius. He showers mercy and love on all his people. And you, O king, have been especially mentioned by name by this great God in scriptures written more than a century before you were born." As Daniel spoke kindly, the anger and suspicion melted from King Cyrus's face. His eyes widened with amazement. Slowly he sat forward in his elegant chair to listen as Daniel continued speaking. "O great king, you will be mentioned favorably by our God for centuries in the future. People from thousands of years from now will know your name. Your mission on earth is glorious and eternal, as I have read to you before from my scripture scrolls. You have been chosen and blessed by our God to be the greatest king in 1,000 years. You were anointed by this God even before you were born to do a great and marvelous work." Daniel looked intently into the king's eyes. The king answered softly, "Daniel, is this really true? Can I have been chosen before I was even born?" Daniel smiled. "Yes, indeed, Your Majesty. You are no ordinary king, but have a heart prepared from eternity to bless all of your people. Shall I bring my scrolls of scriptures and read them to you?" "Daniel, yes, go and get them now. Find those scriptures and read them to me." Daniel hastened to his rooms and came back with 2 scrolls. Firmly and clearly, he explained some things before he read them to his king. "Your Majesty, you know all of us Jews came from a little part of your kingdom known as Judah. There we had a magnificent temple built to our God. Our God visited us in his temple, answering our prayers and directing us for good, if we would obey him. Each morning and evening we perform sacrifices to our God to remind us that His will, after we die, is to come and live with Him forever. But our people often ignored the commands of our God and went out to worship idols of wood and stone who aren't alive and cannot see or hear. Then, when Nebuchadnezzar and his armies came upon us, we were not worthy to be saved. We resisted as long as we could, and when we surrendered, we were marched out of our land and brought here to Babylon. Our temple was destroyed completely. It was torn apart, brick by brick. Everything that could burn was burned to ashes. Our gold and silver fittings and temple vessels were melted down and taken away. Some of them were placed in the temples of idols here in Babylon. Nothing is left of our temple now. We wait and we repent of our former sins, praying that someday we may return and build the temple of our God. King Cyrus. Daniel, read to me those scriptures you say your God spoke to prophets about me. Daniel opened the first scroll and found the place. This is what our God said to the prophet Isaiah. He called you by name before you were born. Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall do all that pleases me. He shall even say to Jerusalem, Thou shalt be built again. He shall say to my temple, Thy foundation shall be laid. I have raised up this king in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. He shall build my city, and he shall let go my captive people, but not for money or reward, saith the Lord of hosts. As Daniel read, King Cyrus listened as intently as if his life depended on understanding the words. Then Daniel lifted and opened the other scroll and explained, This is our prophet Jeremiah's writing. He was there when Jerusalem was destroyed, but he did not come to Babylon with the first captivity as I did. But let me read what he says. I will take from my people the voice of happiness and mirth. I will take away the voice of the bridegroom and the bride. No millstones will be heard to grind grain. No candle will give its light. This whole land shall be an astonishing desolation. My people shall serve the kings of Babylon for 70 years. Daniel slowly rolled up the scroll and then looked at the king, whose brows were furrowed in thought. O king, it has been almost 70 years since we Jews were brought here. It is now for you to decide with intelligence and mercy whether my people may return to our homeland of Judah or not. King Cyrus's deep, considering expression was even more intense. He did not reply to Daniel, but with a sweep of his arm indicated that Daniel should go and leave him alone to think. King Cyrus's heart was touched by the hand of God and by the words of Daniel. Sometime during that first year of his reign as emperor, he decided to send the Jews back to Judea, their homeland. He sent out a proclamation to all the countries over which he reigned. He wrote to them, Cyrus, king of Persia, hereby announces that Jehovah, the God of heaven, who gave me my vast empire, has now given me responsibility of building him a temple in Jerusalem, the land of Judah. All Jews throughout my kingdom may now return to Jerusalem to rebuild this temple of Jehovah, who is the God of Israel and Jerusalem. May his blessings rest upon you. Those Jews who do not want to go may stay, but they should give gold, silver, and all precious things toward the expenses of those who do go. They should supply them with clothing, transportation, supplies for the journey, and a free will offering of money for their temple. Then God gave a great desire to the leaders of all the tribes of Judah and Benjamin, and to all the priests and Levites, to return to Jerusalem at once to rebuild the temple. And all the Jewish exiles who chose to remain in Persia gave them whatever assistance they could, as well as gifts for the temple. King Cyrus himself donated the gold bowls, cups, and other valuable items which King Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple of Jerusalem and had placed in the temples of his own gods. The treasury of Persia presented all these gifts to the leaders of the exiles returning to Judah. When they marched away, a total of 43,260 people, that included servants and special choir members, both men and women were filled with joy. Many of the rich people who stayed behind in Babylon gave a great deal of money to the departing Jews. Their donations added up to $300,000 worth of gold, $170,000 worth of silver, and 100 robes for the priests to wear in the new temple. So the priests and Levites and many of the common people settled in Jerusalem and nearby villages when they got home. They worked hard to uncover the trash that covered the great altar stone that had been the center of Solomon's temple. That September, everyone who had returned to Judah came from their homes and villages to celebrate. Jeshua, the high priest, joined with Zerubbabel, their governor, who was a descendant of King David. Together they led the celebration. Jeshua dedicated the altar of the God of Israel. The musicians blew their trumpets, played their harps, and clanged their cymbals, while the people shouted with so much joy they could be heard for miles away. From that day on, the priests began to sacrifice burnt offerings to the Lord every morning and every evening. The whole country went on to celebrate all their holy days through the years. Now they had a holy altar, which was a solid block of stone, and that very altar is still there today. But the rest of the temple building had been completely destroyed. It was torn apart, with the bricks and pieces scattered everywhere. So after the altar was dedicated, they began to lay the foundation of the temple building itself. Everyone who had come from Babylon worked on the temple. Of course, there had to be enemies who tried to stop the building of the temple. They sent lying letters to the new king in Babylon, saying the Jews had no right to build a temple. The new king of Babylon went through all of his library and found the original records that said King Cyrus would not only allow the building of the temple, but would give much money to help them. So the enemies of the Jews were stopped for a while. It took 2 years, but finally the temple in Jerusalem was finished. Everyone under the age of 70 thought it was gorgeous. But people of age 80 or 90 who had seen the Temple of Solomon in all its glory knew that it had been the most beautiful building they ever saw. They wept bitter tears that the new temple could not be made as beautiful as the old one. There was simply not enough money in the whole country to duplicate what Solomon had made. The next job of the returned Israelites was to build a city wall around Jerusalem so no enemies could come in and kill the people or destroy the temple again. Every single person worked with might and strength, and they got the city wall done in only 52 days. Wow! It took a long time after that for people to rebuild the rest of the city and the villages all around it. But they did it. And that city lasted for many hundreds of years until the time of Jesus Christ. That's the end of the story of Babylon captivity, but exciting things were still going on back in Babylon. Join me again to learn about a girl who was both beautiful and brave. Bye for now.